Hey, Mary, I'm a WASPA.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
We're recording.
Thank you.
Out of here.
Why are there 5 of us on?
It looks like we've got 3 attendees.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I hope everyone is well. We are planning on a few more participants, so we are 1 minute before the hour, so we will wait until 1. Oh, and there it is, 1 o'clock. I don't want to hold off any longer in starting the presentation because we do have quite a bit to get through today, and I do want to respect everyone's time. So I think we will go ahead and get started. First, I just want to remind everyone that you will be muted throughout the presentation. I also want to let everyone know that anytime you have a question, you can go ahead and use the question and answer function right at the bottom of the Zoom presentation. And you can use that anytime. So at any time throughout anything that we're doing, if you have a question, just go ahead and type it in there. And that way your question can get answered pretty much on demand. Also, just want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and it will be available probably by the end of next week on the OASPA website. Let's go ahead and get started. First, for any of you that are new to your craft, I do want to introduce OASPA and this presentation. OASPA is a non-profit organization, and we are comprised of financial aid administrators from across the state. The outreach committee, the OASPA outreach committee, is an all-volunteer committee, and we are the ones putting on this presentation today. And we also serve as a primary resource of pertinent and current financial aid information. We also serve in a lot of different roles at our institutions as well. The committee then kind of gives this information. We disseminate it through a lot of different functions, this webinar presentation. We also have other functions such as high school nights, and we do articulations, things of that nature. The information today is being provided free to all counselors on the webinar. You do have permission to copy and use these materials with your students and your families, and you cannot charge or assess any fee for this material that is being presented, and you do need to have permission for other use of this information that's being presented. You can contact the OASPA Outreach Chair, or you can email us directly at outreach@oaspa.org. So the Ohio FAFSA 22 initiative has been really put in place by the Ohio Department of Higher Education. It is fully supported by ODHE. It is a statewide effort to increase FAFSA completion for the class of 22. As I'm sure many of you know, FAFSA completion is down, and down for many reasons, probably primarily due to COVID. But there is an initiative and there is a push to increase FAFSA completion, not only in the state of Ohio, but across the country. Here in Ohio, many grants have been approved for a lot of different organizations, community organizations, school districts, et cetera, to implement strategies to increase FAFSA completion. $1.7 million has already been spent and has already been earmarked for 25 groups. Professional development, such as today's webinar, is made available through this support from the Ohio Department of Higher Education. There are lots of resources available. We're going to talk more about those at the end of the presentation, but you can always visit the oaspa.org webpage, go straight to the counselors page for additional resources. And then there are lots of enhancements to the FAFSA student level tracking system that the state has, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. As of September 24th, here in the state of Ohio, we ranked 14th in the country for FAFSA completion for the class of 2021. We are behind from the class of 2020 by about 5%, and only about 62% of the 21 class has actually completed the FAFSA. We need assistance if we're going to get those FAFSA completion numbers up. And so that's part of the reason for our webinar today. Nationally, we're behind by about 4%, only having about 60% our students having completed the FAFSA. There are a lot of tools for you to utilize to see the completion of FAFSA, so different tracking tools that you can use. To look at aggregate numbers and comparison options, you can go to yourfuture.org FAFSA tracker. It's right on the screen here. You can also compare last year's information, and you can do that by going to the Ohio K-12 helps /FAFSA. Just want to point out here that in order to utilize this link, your superintendent would have had to have signed a data sharing agreement. We often hear that, oh, I can't get in or it's not working. And what really has happened is that the superintendent of your school district has not signed that data sharing agreement. So please note that this is a great tool, but unless your superintendent has signed it, you will not be able to utilize it. The 22-23 FAFSA data is becoming available now. As everyone knows, the FAFSA opened for 21-22 October 1st. And also just to point out that many enhancements have been done to the Ohio site this year. So there's a lot of new stuff going on. We're going to start today with the FAFSA line by line information, talking about the FSA ID. The FSA ID is probably the first and most important step in completing the FAFSA. The FSA ID is the username and password that gives the student and the parent not only access to the Federal Student Aid's online system, but it also serves as the student and parent's legal signature. Again, I say it's the first and most important step, and it really should be completed before beginning the FAFSA completion process. It's a much easier process if you have, or if the student and the parent have both gone through that process and have an FSA ID ready to go when they sit down to complete the FAFSA. One parent and the student will have to have an FSA ID. A couple of things to remember here: the student and the parent both have to have distinct and unique email addresses as well as cell phone numbers. And another important note is that, and this is something that maybe we wouldn't have had to think about in the past, is that students or parents that may have a recycled cell phone number may have to reach out to FSA, the Federal Student Aid 800 number, to get to complete the process to receive an FSA ID. We're seeing more and more that those students and parents with recycled, maybe they just got a brand new cell phone number, that cell phone number may have been used by a parent or a student in the past. And only FSA can override that now and give that cell number to you as, or to the student or parent as their new cell number. Another reminder, students should not use their high school email address because it is very likely that those will be deleted after graduation. The FAFSA website has gone through some changes, as those of you who have been in this job for a while know that FAFSA.ed or FAFSA.ed.gov was our go-to link. That now redirects you to the new link, which is studentaid.gov, and then apply for aid FAFSA. So that is the new redirect. So do not be alarmed if that's where you're redirected. You can still type in the FAFSA.gov or FAFSA.ed.gov. It's going to redirect you to the new link. It's in English and Spanish. There is a PDF version available for those who need it. And there's also the mobile app on the cell phone that you can use, the My Student Aid app. Remember that the FAFSA did open on October 1st, and this FAFSA is using information from the 2020 federal tax forms. So when students first go to that link or that redirect link to complete the FAFSA, they're going to come to this FAFSA welcome page. This is where it all starts. So students that are brand new to this is their first time in college, they've never completed a FAFSA before, and the way the presentation is going to run through would begin this process with start here. So they would simply click on start here. Another thing I want to point out is at the bottom of this page, there are always announcements at the bottom of this homepage. So whenever a student goes to the FAFSA or a parent goes to the FAFSA webpage, they're going to see these announcements, and a lot of them may, see that there'll be an outage or different things that are happening to the FAFSA. So I did want to point that out, that these announcements are important and they should probably take note of those. So once they go ahead and click start here, we'll then go to the next page that says welcome to the FAFSA form. And here is all about role selection. They want to know who's doing this, who has logged on, who's doing the FAFSA. So they ask the student to tell, or they ask the individual that has logged on to tell them about themselves. So in this case, we're going to say that we are the student and want access to the FAFSA form. There are two other options, the parent filling out a form for a FAFSA and also a preparer. I just want to speak to the bottom one. Counselors, please know that students and parents should not hire anyone to assist them in completing the FAFSA. This is not something that they need to pay someone to help them with. If they have questions, they can certainly come to you guys, or they can come to their colleges that they're looking to attend, but they really shouldn't be paying anyone to help them fill out their FAFSAs. So once they go ahead and say that they are the student and they want to access the FAFSA form, they'll go ahead and click that, and then it will ask them to tell them about themselves. And so they'll reiterate that they are the student, they want access to the form, and that they're going to log on to continue. Remember, we indicated that completing that FSA ID process ahead of time was the most important step, and here is exactly why. They do not have to create the FSA ID, they can go straight to log on and continue. Next, they'll be asked to enter their personal identifiers. Very simply, they're just going to put their full name, their date of birth, their social security number, and then they will go ahead and hit continue. Once they continue, they'll be asked to log in, and this is where they will actually enter either their FSA username, their email, or their mobile phone, their password. They do have an option here to create an account if they haven't already done so, but again, if they complete everything ahead of time, they will not need to do that. They can go straight to the login page. Once logging in, and we're going to take the most common scenario, which is dependent student with parental data for our upcoming graduating seniors. And most often our upcoming seniors will be, or upcoming graduates will be dependent students with parental information. So that's the path we're going to take through the FAFSA line by line today. So the student will go ahead then, enter again their identifying personal information, their PII here, and then they will click continue. Once they have done that, they will then enter their student email and phone. Simple information as we collect information on the student, and click continue. When they click continue, they'll enter their permanent mailing address, whatever their permanent home address, that's what they're going to enter here, including their state and their zip, and they will click continue again. This next page is actually going to confirm their residency and eligibility through the state in which they live in. So they're going to be asked a few additional questions about the state in which they lived, as well as their US citizenship status. And in this case, we will assume that the student is a US citizen or US national, and that they have lived in their state for over 5 years, and the student will click continue. They will be again asked to verify that their state of legal residency is whatever state it is, and a few other questions, and click continue. If the student was not a legal resident of whatever state for more than 5 years, that really is information that each college will use, especially for our state grants here in the state of Ohio. Students residency in Ohio to actually be eligible for state grants. So important to know, that's why they're asking these questions, and students will have to say when they became a legal resident. If indeed they answer no to that question, they weren't in the state of Ohio for more than 5 years or whatever that might be, then they're going to have to indicate when they did become a resident of the state. It moves on to collect information about the student's education, and they want to know what the student's status will be when they begin college in the 22-23 school year, so next fall. And what will the student have earned? And in this case, we will assume a high school diploma. What college degree or certificate will you be working on when you begin the 22-23 school year? This will be a first bachelor's degree. And I want to point out here and just give a little bit more information. This is a very important question, and a question where we see some error. Students that maybe are taking College Credit Plus or maybe doing college work, maybe they've already achieved an associate's degree or they have some credential of some kind, they are still receiving their first bachelor's degree. So it is important that we don't indicate otherwise, because then it may take away eligibility for state aid. So it's important that they indicate that this is their first bachelor's degree. And then what will your college grade level be when you begin this school year? Well, certainly it's not going to be a fourth year senior because they will be first year college students. Again, even if they've taken college courses while in the high school, they are still going to be a first year college student. And then the question below, are they were interested in work study, and students can answer that as they choose. Student selective service, I do want to let everyone know that this question is still on the FAFSA, and they are required, students are required to complete this question, so it will not be enforced for the FAFSA year. It is still required to be completed. This question, as well as a few others, will be removed once the new FAFSA comes out for 23-24. I can't even believe I'm saying 23-24, but they will be required to complete this. So students will answer male or female, whether or not they're registered with selective service, and continue.
Mary, I just wanted to also point while it might not be an eligibility question for federal student aid, this still could be an eligibility requirement for state aid. So students and parents and families should be aware of that.
Thank you, Emily. That's very important. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we'll move on. Students' driver's license information. They'll need to enter their driver's license information if they have it. They use this as just another identifying factor. So they'll enter that information, continue. And then they'll also enter information as to whether or not the student was in foster care. And they're also going to answer information about the completion level of their parents' education. As we move on, the student will be asked if they have ever received federal student aid before. They will also be asked if they have ever been convicted of the possession or sale of illegal drugs, etc. This is, again, one of those questions that will be going away. Even though it is going away and will not be enforced, students are still required to answer this question. As we move through, the student will now need to add their high school. And in order to do that, they can use a few different ways to get their high school of completion. They can select it by their state, their city, their full high school name, and then they will hit continue. And the high school search results will return as many, depending on how specific they get, will determine the number of results that they get. And then they will select their high school that they graduated from and then continue. They will confirm on this page that that's the high school that they graduated from. And they'll continue. Here, the FAFSA form is looking for the student to indicate the colleges that the student would like the FAFSA information to be sent to. So there are two separate ways the student can do this. The student can search by the school name, the city or the state, and they can hit search by just entering one or more of those options. They can just click the state if they like. If they know the state, the city, and they can do that. So for example, we're going to say Ohio City. School name maybe Ohio State University, I don't know. But the more parameters they fill in, the more specific their search will be. And the student will then hit continue. The student can also search by federal school code. So if they know the school code for which the colleges that they would like to attend, they can also use that function, a federal school code search, which I don't think is probably as common. But again, if a student knows that school code, the school in which they want to attend, they can certainly enter it there and hit search. Once they have entered one those search methods, then the results will pop up and they can select the colleges here. Please remember that they can select up to 10 colleges to have results sent to. Once they've selected all of the colleges that they want their FAFSA data sent to, they'll then select their housing information. So they're going to select their colleges and their housing plans. Their housing plans can either be on campus, off campus, or with parent. They'll select that for every school that they've selected to have the data go to, and then they'll hit continue. Once all of the collected for the colleges that the student is considering, then we get on to more of the information about the student. So the student's marital status is what we're looking for now. But before we talk about this and what the student is going to enter here, I want to be sure that it's understood that students and or parents should be saving frequently as they go through the app. And I think this is a great opportunity here to show that the application was successfully saved. This is just a hint and just a reminder that as students and parents go through this form, they want to click save frequently because they don't want to lose any data. So it's important to hit save, and then continue. Another important point here, just because it's come up, is the FAFSA form belongs to the student. Every time that it says you or your in here, it refers to the student. And I want to put some context to that. Oftentimes what we see is that the parent goes in and completes a FAFSA for a student. And what happens is they end up putting their own information in here, which is really a bad thing and causes a lot of issues, not only for the student's FAFSA, but to correct those issues are very time consuming and sometimes very difficult to do. So it is important to remind your students and parents that you always refers to the student. This is the student's FAFSA. This is the student's information. So a great place to put in here, what is the student's, a place to enter this information as we start to talk about the student and their marital status. So what is the student's marital status? And most often it will be single. So the student will enter their marital status and then they'll hit continue. The dependency status questions begin here. And so the first one is whether or not the student has any children. So just a quick point here, the student may have children, but remember those children have to be supported greater than 50% or more by the student to be considered the student's dependents. So does the student have any dependent children? In this case, we're going to answer no. Does the student have any other dependents other than spouse? And we'll say in this scenario, the answer was no as well. So we'll just keep moving on. These are additional dependency status answered. You can select any or all that apply, or you can select none of the above. Student can do that and they'll then hit continue. The next question has to do with student homelessness. So if the student was homeless, they can answer yes here, and then a whole slew of other questions will happen. We're not going to go down that route today. But in this case, the student is, for our test student, has answered no, and the student will then click continue to move on. And as I indicated previously, the majority of our graduating class will need parent information. So the dependent student status is that they truly are dependent students, and they will be providing parental information. So again, the student says, I will provide parental information, and we click continue. One thing I do want to point out is if the student is unable to provide information about parents, that is not a great situation. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions about that. Throw those in the Q&A function if you have students in general. Or also, you can also reach out to the OASFA outreach committee with those questions directly if you have maybe specific scenarios. But for now, we're going to go with, I will provide parental information. So now the student needs to figure out whose information should I provide. And so the student has to answer one of these questions to make the determination of what information am I going to provide. In many cases, the parents live together, whether they're married or unmarried, they are living together. That may be the case. Or my parents are divorced or separated, and I live with one more than the other. Or they're divorced and separated, and I live with both equally. Or I was equally adopted. One of these situations will have had to have happened for a dependent student. They'll make the determination of which one fits with them, and they'll click continue. And in this case, the student has selected married or remarried, and it will require the date in which the parents were married or remarried. Again, we're getting that notice that this form belongs to the student. You and your always refers to the student, not the parents. So the student clicks continue and moves on. And now they're going to enter the information about their parents. So this is going to be the information for the first parent, whether it's father, mother, step parent, whatever. They're going to enter the private and personal information of the parent. Or the parent could do this here. It doesn't really matter in that case, but it's just going to require social security number, name, date of birth, and email. And then the student will click continue. And then we get into the information about the other parent, whether that be the father, the mother, the step parent again. So both parents' information is entered on the form, and the student clicks continue.
Yes, and so if the parents selected that they were married, you would get a parent one and a parent two, or if they parents are living together but unmarried. If the parent is divorced or single, they would only have one parent that comes up. So again, the FAFSA has logic built in, so we'll only have screens for the information provided.
Thank you, Emily. And Emily, if you want to go ahead and pick up here, I'll go ahead and turn to you and let you kind of run through the parent state of legal residence, et cetera.
Sure, absolutely. As we continue on to the FAFSA, we'll get into the parent demographic, and it's also going to ask for the parent's state of legal residence. And so based on the information that they have provided, it's going to ask whether or not that they've lived based on the address that they provided, whether or not they've lived there for at least 5 years. Another thing I wanted to point out here is there are always these little question mark icons here. Those are clickable and will give the filer, either the student or the parent, more information about the question and have a little more information to go off of. So if a parent or a student has a question about one of the questions on the FAFSA, they can click on that icon and get more information. Okay, so next section is going to be information about your parents' dependents. So this will wanted to point out that this is not going to include the student. So this is going to be asking about other dependent that the children that the parents have, and then other dependents do the parents have. So again, not including the student, the current student in question for the FAFSA. Here we're going to see, same question here, but you can see that for this test student, we have entered 2 additional dependent children and 2 additional other dependents. On the next screen, it will then calculate the parental household information. This is a new feature, and I think it is much more clear to students and parents on how this information is calculated. So the student is number 1. Your parents are household numbers 2 and 3, and then other dependent children, there are 2, and other dependents of your parents are 2, for a total household size of 9. So in this scenario, student would have 2 siblings, and maybe the grandparents also live in the household. So again, it breaks down the household size. If parents get to this section and say, oh, nope, that's not really our household size, they were able to hit that previous button and go back and update that information. Again, the number in college is asked, and it is out of the 7 dependents. So how many will be in college between July 1 and June 30th? And this will not include parents that are currently in college or will be in college, but would include the student and other members of the household. So of the 7 dependents of the parents, how many will be in college? They will enter that information and then hit continue. Now we're going to talk about parent tax filing status and get into the parental financial section. So there will be 3 questions that will be asked. The first is, have your parents completed their tax return for the year? So again, for the 22-23 FAFSA, we are looking for tax information from the 2020 year. And so they'll select whether they've already completed, will complete, or will not be a tax filer. For this presentation, both the parent and the student will be tax filers, so we will go through and see those questions. So in this scenario, the parents have selected they've already completed. They use the IRS Form 1040, and they are a married filing joint return. And that will be found on the parent's tax return. This will allow, these are the questions that will allow the FAFSA to determine whether the IRS data retrieval tool is available for the parents to use. And it is recommended that if eligible, that parents and students use this. Here they can, obviously they can go to previous, they can skip the data retrieval tool and complete the financial section manually, or they can proceed to the IRS. Next screen here, as the parent is eligible to use the data retrieval tool, they can decline and they will go to the manual section, or they will proceed to the IRS. If they proceed to the IRS, they will indicate which of the parents they are, parent 1 or 2, and they will enter in their FSA username and password. Again, they can skip manually and enter the information in manually, or they can continue on to the data retrieval tool.
Just to chime in, just to share and remind everyone that the majority of the answers should be already completed if they are tax filers. Even parents or students that file for an extension, that extension and those taxes should have all been completed prior to having to file the FAFSA. So if they are tax filers, they should have already filed their taxes.
This is going to be the parent IRS information view. So if the parent is ineligible or decides not to use the data retrieval tool, they will be required to enter the financial information in manually. We will go through the manual questions. There are situations in which parents are not eligible to use the data retrieval tool. The most likely one is parents who file their taxes separately. They are not eligible at this time to use the data retrieval tool. So the first question that the FAFSA asks as far as parent financials is the adjusted gross income. And right under the question, it's going to tell you exactly where in the IRS form, line 11 is the information that you want to use. So for families that need to be able to enter the information, they'll want to have their tax information handy from 2020, and then they'll simply go to the IRS form 1040, look for line 11, and enter that figure into this box and hit continue. Next section is parent income from work, and this will be parent 1 and parent 2. And again, it will let the filer know exactly where they need to look and what information they need to enter. So for parent 1, they'll look on line 1040 plus schedule 1. So they'll have to have all your information together and add those things in together and enter the information here. Next page would be amount of your parents' income tax for 2020. Again, they will go on to the IRS form and use the prompts there to indicate what amount they need to do. If parents did file separately, they will want to take that information and add those amounts together to put in these boxes. The only thing that is separated would be the income earned from work from parent 1 and parent 2, but the adjusted gross income from both parents, if they filed separately, would need to be combined, and same with the parent income tax information would need to be combined. Again, we encourage students to click on, or families to click on those little question mark boxes, and additional information will be provided. Next section will be parent questions for tax filers. Parents will want to read each question and enter the information that is relevant to them. First question deals with combat pay. We want all FAFSA filers to read the questions thoroughly, read them for completion, because it'll let them know what to include and then also what not to include. So again, for combat pay, they're only supposed to enter the taxable combat pay. And again, those question mark icons are off to the side there for more information and additional information. So they'll enter any combat pay information, grant and scholarship information that was reported, if there are education credits that are on their taxes, untaxed portions of IRA distributions, IRA deductions, and then tax exempt interest income. Again, it'll tell you exactly where that information can be found on tax forms. Then they will hit continue. Additional parent financial information. This will be child support, cooperative education programs, or taxable earnings from other need-based employment programs. Again, read the questions thoroughly and for completion, and then enter the information that is asked. Parents will also be asked about untaxed income, and they will want to read through these questions and enter any of the following items for 2020. This is child support received, housing, food, or other living allowances paid to members of the military, clergy, or others. Again, we'll want to read all these questions thoroughly and completely. If the information can be found on a W-2, that information will be listed here. And again, look to the question marks for additional information to include or exclude information. There are 3 asset questions. The first talks about the current balance of cash savings and checking accounts. That is going to be as of today. That is not a question that needs to be updated. So the FAFSA is as of today, that the data is filed. It will ask about investments, including real estate. Please note here that real estate does not include the primary residence of the family, but if there are other real estate assets, those would be included. Again, those question marks will prompt your families to know what to include and what to exclude from those questions. And then the last question is the net worth of current businesses or investment farms. And again, it's clear on here, you do not include a family farm or business with 100 or fewer full-time employees. So parent will hit continue. And now we're back to the student tax filing status. So we have moved on from the parent financials. At the top here, you can see all the check marks for all the sections that we have completed. And we're on to section 6, the student financials. Again, the student financial questions and the parent financial questions are pretty much mirrored, but we'll go through the student questions as well. So again, we're going to ask about the completion status of those taxes. Like Mary said, again, we're asking for tax information from 2 years ago. So we have passed extension filing status, filing dates. So tax filers should have access to this information. The type of tax return that the student did, and then their filing status. Again, it's going to note up at the top that this information belongs to the student, so you and your will refer to the student. So we're back on the student page. Again, the data retrieval tool information has popped up here. There are many ways to opt into it and opt out of it. If the family, whether the parent or the student, are eligible to use the data retrieval, it is always recommended. All of the information that comes from that tax information will be uploaded directly to the FAFSA. Again, we will go through these questions manually just so we can go through them kind of line by line. Based on the students' information that they provided, it will let them know whether they are eligible for the data retrieval tool. And again, it is recommended to proceed to the IRS to use the data retrieval tool. That's why those things are highlighted and more bold, but there are ways to opt out of that and enter the information in manually. Again, we'll go through the questions one by one. For the student, it will ask for the student's adjusted gross income. It will refer to spouses on here. There are students that do not need parental information and may be married at the time. But again, we just need to remember that this is the student information. So again, follow the prompts to where the information can be found. If we're doing this manually, line 11 on the 1040 will be where the adjusted gross income information can be found. And hit continue. The student income earned from work. So the student will enter in their wages, salaries, and tips, etc. from 2020 and hit continue. The amount of income tax is the next question. Again, they can follow the prompts to where to find that information on the tax return. If it is a negative number, which it can be sometimes, it lets them know to enter a 0. Same tax filer questions about combat pay and grant scholarship education questions. Again, same questions that the parents received. Again, these are for students that are tax filers. Additional financial information, child support that the student paid, earnings from a co-op program or other need-based employment programs. Again, same questions, but just for the student side. Student untaxed information. So again, they will read through those and include the pertinent information. For most dependent students, a lot of these things don't pertain to them, but again, this is a federal application, so we always recommend reading everything thoroughly and for completion. Student asset information, there is an additional question that's not found on the parent section, and it does ask about whether the student has current assets that exceed $2,200. And again, there's that question mark there, and the assets is highlighted. So you can click on either one of those and it will let the student know what to include or exclude from that asset calculation. It'll again ask for the total current balance of cash savings and checking accounts, the net worth of the student's investments, and a net worth of the student's current businesses or investment firms. And we will be through all the financial information, and we will now get to the summary and the signature section. Like we said before, this would be where preparer information would be submitted. Like we said before, families should not have to pay for assistance with the FAFSA. Again, there are many resources out there. We will talk about all the resources that OASFA provides. Again, we've put right here, this is rare for having a paid preparer for the FAFSA. So once we get to this point, you will have a summary of all of the questions that were of the FAFSA and what your answers were. So we're just going to go through these pages here. It will have information that was entered, and it's important to review this information to make sure that it is accurate.
And Emily, I'm just going to chime in for just a quick second. All too often, even though the FAFSA is very clear in its messaging that the student or the parent is not done yet, as the FAFSA is not yet signed, we see parents and students exit and end and think that they are done. So I think it's important that the student and the parent know, and that we continue to remind them that until they get a completion page or a congratulations page, they are not done yet. This summary is really kind of a chance for them to review all the data that they've entered and make sure that it is all accurate in case they need to go back and make a change.
So again, it just goes through each section of the FAFSA and lists the questions that were presented and answered. I did want to point out on this page, if students or parents use the IRS data retrieval tool, what will come over instead of the raw data, it will be masked, and you will see, it will just simply say transferred from the IRS. Again, that's to mask the data and keep it secure. On the summary page, that's what families will see if the data retrieval tool was used. And you can see all of the sections that would be transferred directly in from the IRS.
And Emily, if I could just chime in one more time about that information. We do hear from students and parents that say that the parent doesn't, or the parent doesn't want the student to see the information, or I don't want my student to see this. It is important to note that the student and the parent can complete their sections very separately. And because the data is masked, there is no chance that the student will be able to see the parent's information, especially their income information, if they use that data retrieval tool. So I think that is important to note. And it is important to note that the parent and the student can also complete this FAFSA in a different format. The student may want to complete it on their cell phone using the web app, and the parent may want to use the internet and maybe use it from their personal computer or their laptop. They can do that. But I want to be clear with that, and I want that us to be sure that we do share that information with students and parents, so that there isn't any question about what a student can and can't see if the parent enters income information.
Thank you. Now we've come to the agreement of terms, and this is the student view, and this is where the student acknowledges the certification statement. And reads through this. There will be using federal funds for educational purposes. Again, a reminder, this is a federal application, and they're also certifying that the information they provided is accurate. Signature status for the first will be the student. The student has signed with their FSA ID. And then it lets the student know that a parent signature is needed. There is a section here for the, if the parent is right with the student, they can go ahead and click here and provide parent signature, or the parent can log in at a later time and provide the signature. Once the parent is ready to sign, they choose whether they are parent 1 or parent 2. It will give them some demographic information so they know who parent 1 and parent 2 is, and then they will click the provided link to provide their signature. Then the parents will have to read and agree to the terms of the application. And then they will sign using their FSA ID. There are other options to sign and submit, but if the parent has an FSA ID, that is the method that they will use. They will sign using their FSA ID, username, and password. Again, this is just another view of the parent signature solution. The choice between parents is only present if the information was provided for 2 parents. Otherwise, only 1 parent will be present. Now we've got the confirmation page. This means we have successfully submitted to federal student aid. It will give you a congratulations email. It will give you a confirmation number. And it'll also give you next steps. So you will receive an email version of this page. So remember to always include a usable email address, and then it'll let you know what's going to happen next. After that, it will take 3 to 5 business days for the FAFSA to process, and then you'll get an email notifying you when that FAFSA has processed. The information will be sent to the schools the students selected, and after the FAFSA processes. And then the schools will contact you if they need more information or when they're ready to discuss your financial aid award. And then if you have any questions about your financial aid package, you'll want to contact the school directly. There is a section here, if you have another child who needs to complete a FAFSA, you can transfer, the parent can transfer information into the other students' FAFSA, but again, there will be another signature requirement.
And also just to add that once they get this confirmation page, letting them know that they have completed it, they're also going to receive data that's collected by the U.S. Department of Education on the schools that they have entered on the FAFSA to receive their information. It's going to give them information on their graduation rate, the retention rate, and transfer out rate. So you can see that information on the far side of the screen there. Every school that the student has entered to receive will have their data identified there.
So let's go ahead and talk about federal verification. A portion of FAFSAs that are submitted are selected for the process of verification. And this means that they must submit documents to confirm the FAFSA information that they provided. Roughly 18% of FAFSAs are selected by the Department of Education. Students who are Pell eligible will be selected at a much higher rate. The department can and does select students for verification. Please also know that institutions have the authority to also select FAFSAs for verification. It's important that students and families respond quickly to any requests for information from the college. And like I said, whether if the FAFSA is not selected by the Department of Education, it could be chosen institutionally for FAFSA verification. If there's any reason to question something, if there's something that doesn't seem correct, there's conflicting information, and families would be contacted by the school if they are selected. Please note that the Department of Education suspended verification for the remainder of the 2021-2022 academic year. However, verification is returning for the 22-23 FAFSA, much to our sadness. If families are selected for verification, they will be asked, these are some common things that will be requested. Some sort of verification worksheet. These are going to look different across colleges and universities. So if your FAFSA has been selected, you may be having to fill out multiple verification worksheets for each, if you've selected more than one institution to send your information to. If you've not used the data retrieval tool, you may be asked to provide a tax return transcript or a federal tax return for the 2020 year. And like we said, an alternative to submitting that tax documentation is completing the data retrieval tool. If there are students or parents who did not file, W-2s may be requested. Also for non-filers, a verification of a non-filing letter from the IRS may be requested for parents or independent students. Dependent students who did not file taxes, who were not obligated to file taxes, do not need to obtain the verification of non-filing letter. All right, let's go ahead and talk about special circumstances. I'm going to hand this back over to Mary to talk about special circumstances.
Thanks, Emily. I do want to step back for just 1 second before we go into special circumstances. I know that there is a question right now in the Q&A about atypical situations. And although I know that Ed or Marlon will be working to answer that question, I did want to just quickly speak to it. I think one of the questions was, what about atypical situations and a student maybe that can't get parental information, for example, a foster care or a student and a foster youth student. And I just want to just share right up front that would be covered in one of the dependency status questions. It will be asked if the student was in foster care, and by checking that box, that will make the student independent. So it doesn't mean that they won't have to do some other things, but there are certain things in place, especially for our foster youth, and that is one of them. So I did want to share that, and I know that either Ed or Marlon is going to probably touch on a few other things, but I think because there are so many different scenarios around maybe income and investments, it's hard to speak generally to that at all. But I did want to speak about the foster youth. So let's go ahead and get right into professional judgment. As Emily did indicate, verifications have been suspended right now due to COVID, and we do know that they will pick back up again. But I want to speak one more thing to verifications. Although we have been, and I say we, this is financial aid administrators across the country, have been given the ability to not verify when a student has been selected, the institution does still have the ability to verify that student. So I don't think that we should just blanket say that no verifications are going to happen, because there are some cases and some situations and some institutions that will still verify. So counselors, please know that and be prepared to assist if a student is asking, hey, they want they want me to complete this verification. What do I have to do? So please know that there are some situations and institutions that will still be verifying. And special circumstance is one of them. Although, again, we've been given the provision to not verify in the case of a professional judgment or a special circumstance, some schools may still do that prior to completing a special circumstance. So if we want to talk about what a special circumstance is, we first have to understand that the 22-23 FAFSA is using information from the 2020 tax year. This prior year, and I don't really like to say prior, but using tax information from 2 years ago is really not a very clear indication, and could be, but in some cases may not be a very clear indication of what a student's financials look like today. So the government has put in place something called special circumstances. In the industry, we call it professional judgment. But what it does is it allows for those things that maybe aren't really the case anymore. Maybe we've indicated on our FAFSA that we made 150,000 in 2020, but maybe due to COVID or something else that the parent is no longer employed, or maybe the student, maybe it's an independent student, the student is no longer employed. So to remedy these issues, there is a process called special circumstance. All special circumstances are on a case-by-case basis, and they are school by school. So just because you submit a special circumstance to one college doesn't mean that special circumstance will be accepted in another college. So again, they are case by case and they are school by school, and they do require documentation and adequate documentation. So the documentation really needs to be a clear picture and reflect what's going on in that family's financials, really. Again, we will talk about COVID, that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that we are seeing an increase in appeals. We have seen an increase that started with the pandemic. So we do know, and we are geared up and ready to handle these professional judgments or special circumstances as they come in. Special circumstances are conditions that exist that can't be documented on the FAFSA. Again, it's because the FAFSA uses 2020 information. So some of those things include a loss of employment or a reduction in employment, wages, or unemployment compensation. It can also be, maybe a loss of untaxed income, like maybe child support, or maybe separation, divorce, or even death after the FAFSA was submitted. So these are all things that can qualify for special circumstance. Remember, it's a case by case and a one-off, and can be dependent on whatever the situation was. So some examples here, we'll list some and talk about them. Unusual or uncovered medical and dental expenses. And I start with that one to say that the FAFSA does have income protection allowances, and a good deal of medical and dental expenses are already in the protection allowance. So they would have to be unusual and unusually high that aren't covered by insurance or some other source. So if a parent or a student has unusual or uncovered medical or dental expenses, they could submit those and maybe those bills and documentation showing that they weren't covered by insurance, and that could be considered for a special circumstance. There's also maybe the loss of child support, extraordinary dependent care. We've seen a lot of that with COVID-19, just to share that with all of you. We have seen a good deal of extraordinary dependent care, not only because some daycares or some caregivers are no longer giving care, but because in some cases, depending on the employment, maybe it's different hours than it was before. So we're seeing an awful lot of that. Another example would be divorce, a loss of income or employment, and then the death of a parent or a spouse. So those are all the things that can be submitted. If you have any questions about those, please put those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can maybe address certain and specific ones if you have those. But those really are the primary examples of special circumstance. We'll go ahead now and move on to resources. FAFSA Help Ohio is one of the resources. This is a counselor's resource. Please note that OASFA is starting the process and updating items for the 2023 academic year. Most of those things have now been updated for this. There are still a few that are from the previous academic year, but most have been updated. And the counselor page is what you see here. This is on the FAFSA Help Ohio page. And on this page, you're going to find all kinds of things like the FAFSA line by line webinar that we're doing here today, the FAFSA or the Financial Aid 201 webinar, which will happen probably after the first of the year, high school counselor workshops that will be going on here soon, the articulation presentations that happened earlier this year. And then there's also the college access and school counselors contact database. So these are financial resources and tools that are provided by OASFA. We also have registrations for the trainings that will be also located here. You can always send your questions to outreach@oasfa.org. If we continue on with the FAFSA Help Ohio page, there are also resources for students and parents. And this actually is a screenshot straight from the resources for students and parents. And it will link students right to the FAFSA on the web, the FSA ID, and other federal student aid information. There's also a link to the Ohio Department of Higher Education, so Student Aid in Ohio. And then there are Ohio FAFSA resources. That's the FAFSA It's For You. This page also has instructional videos, handouts, and you can also link this page if you to your school site so that students and parents can click right to it and go right here to the FAFSA Help Ohio page. We are also able to assist in helping find presenters for your high school financial aid nights. We have had multiple requests this year and have had those nights being virtual as well as in person. There is also a pre-recorded session available, and you can also click on that to utilize the pre-recorded session. If you'd like to request a presenter for a financial aid night, you can use the Request a Financial Aid Night presenter link there. There's some key information that you'll need to enter on that page if you'd like to request it. And then we'll assist in finding you a presenter for your high school financial aid night. Again, just want to indicate that we are doing those virtually as well as in person. It's whatever your school is allowing, so you can make that selection. And then just want to remind everyone to be sure and put your name and email address into the College Access and School Counselors Contact Database at the oasfa.org website. There's a lot of benefits to signing up for this listserv. You can receive great information, and some of those things, most importantly, are workshop registration information. You'll be notified of those workshops that we're doing. You'll also be notified of any events that will be coming up and details of those events, as well as multiple training announcements. All right, well, we've come to our presentation. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I will reiterate again, we've actually completed, I think we moved through the information very quickly today. I do want to reiterate that the presentation will be available on the OASFA website. Will probably not be available until later next week, so just check back or ask us, or maybe reach out to the OASFA outreach.org email if you have questions about when the presentation will be available. And also, if you have any other additional questions, you can always email the OASFA email, which was on the previous slide. we can also assist with your questions. So if maybe after the presentation you have any other questions, maybe something came up as you were working with a student, or maybe you're reviewing the presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out and we would be happy to answer those questions. So I will say that we can stay on for an additional 5 minutes here. At 2:15, I will go ahead and we'll end the presentation if there aren't any additional questions, but we will leave the Q&A function open at least until 2:15 for any additional questions.
Hey, Mary, this is Ed handling the Q&A. I did
Yes.
have a question come through, and I'd love to hear your and Emily's take on it. So there's a question specifically about a student who is coming back and completing the FAFSA. However, they have a bachelor's degree from a foreign institution. Now, I know that the guidance states that once a bachelor's degree is conferred, the student is no longer eligible for Pell Grant or any need-based assistance. However, I was wondering if you or Emily had any insight regarding a bachelor's degree conferred from a foreign institution, as I wasn't familiar regarding the granularity of that, and just didn't know if you two had any additional insight on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Emily, you can please feel free to chime in as well. I know that you deal with it, but I will share that as long as that transcript, that foreign transcript has been evaluated, and it would be based on the institution's evaluation system, but as long as that foreign transcript has been evaluated and that equivalency is a bachelor's degree with whatever that translation is, then the student is not eligible for federal Pell Grant funds. Emily, did I indicate all of that correctly based on your interpretations?
Yes, that would be my interpretation. So when filling out the FAFSA, evaluation said it was equivalent, then I would say, yes, I have a previous bachelor's degree, and depending on what program that they were looking to enter into, they would select they're working on a second bachelor's degree.
And Ed, and I'll just further indicate that, you know, if the student has that official document saying that they have had that evaluation done, and it is the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, I just want to be clear that even though the student may indicate that they do not have a previous bachelor's degree, but yet they turn in information, maybe through admissions. I guess I'm saying all of this to say that the student may enter on the FAFSA, no, I don't have it, but yet when they turn in their admissions documents, or they turn in documents maybe to another department at the institution, that could create conflicting information, which then would have to be resolved. So it is important that the student does understand that any information entered at any institution, whether it's through financial aid, through the FAFSA, through admissions, through registrar, whatever, that information all has to be consistent and all has to make sense. So just because you enter, I've not had a previous bachelor's degree, yet you do share maybe with the registration department a bachelor's degree so that you can transfer in all these credit hours, that would be conflicting, and then it would have to be resolved.
Great. And actually, Maria has a follow-up question. So she's asking, evaluated by who? And Maria, part of the admissions process, generally speaking, for institutions is they require students to disclose any prior higher education experience and submit transcripts. So at that point, if it's a foreign transcript, it would be evaluated by either someone at the institution, oftentimes in the registrar's office, or potentially even international admissions, even though it wouldn't be, the student wouldn't be international per se, or there are independent third parties that do also do those types of evaluations. And Mary and Emily, feel free to correct me if I'm incorrect on that.
No, and I think you're right. You're spot
Yep,
on.
you're spot on. Yep.
Yep. Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
And there was another question in the chat that came through regarding special circumstances. So what about housing for medical reasons? So maybe the medical treatment was covered, but the treatment was out of state, requiring the family to pay 2 mortgages, extensive travel costs, flying, driving, etc. How would someone go about that?
That's a great question, Ed. And Emily, I'm going to just give a little information, then I'll ask you to pick up. I would say that is absolutely an opportunity for a special circumstance. So Emily, maybe you can maybe share with what kind of documentation we would be looking for to have a parent and student provide for that situation.
Sure. So again, the family would fill out the FAFSA just as asked, just as the questions are asked, and then reach out to those individual institutions that student is interested in, and follow the steps for their special circumstances appeal. Some things that I would look for would be again, it would be documentation of those expenses. So is there hotel bills or rental bills? I would ask for not only the primary mortgage information, a mortgage amount, some sort of documentation for that, but also the additional expenses. And then we always ask for, a written statement. What's the situation? And they could also include, average costs of meals and things like that.
Perfect. Thanks, Em. Ed or Marlon, and I think Faith is still on as well. Are there any other questions that came through the chat that we feel that we do have 15 minutes? Are there any other questions that came through the chat that we feel that we could maybe offer a little additional information on in this 15 minutes?
So I think this is Ed again. I think one of the questions, and I'm typing the answer here, but if anyone has any specific situations that they have questions about, how can they get support on those? And my recommendation would be, if you want general information, or I should say, if the student is looking at various schools or doesn't have a school they know of at this point, folks can always reach out to us at outreach@oaspa.com. That comes through our inboxes, and we're able to address that. And I mean, obviously reach out to any of us here, but that would be my recommendation.
I agree.
Yeah, perfect.
I think I said oaspa.com. I meant oaspa.org. I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Ed, for correcting that. Thank you. Marlon, did you have anything that you thought would be valuable for the group in these last few minutes?
Yes. So do undocumented parents need to worry about the government pursuing them?
They do not.
Mary, we do have another follow-up question from Maria regarding the international bachelor's. So in this particular situation, the student is actually a refugee and can't provide any documentation regarding the bachelor's degree. This one it gets a little dicey. So I'd love to hear yours and Emily's take, especially as it sounds like you all deal with this. Well, maybe not this particular situation, but international bachelor's degrees a little more frequently than maybe some.
Yeah, that is a very interesting situation. So I guess my question would be, so the student has self-disclosed that they have a bachelor's degree from an institution that is from another country. And without documentation of that degree, I wonder, and the only reason I say this is because we see a lot of international transcripts come through, and a lot of them indicate that the student has received a bachelor's degree in that country, but that does not translate to a bachelor's degree here in the United States. We do see that quite frequently. So my question would be, if the student is self-disclosing it, what documentation would they be providing to the institution that they're wanting to attend about that bachelor's degree? To what gain is that going to be for them? If they're not utilizing, if they can't provide a transcript, or they're not asking to have a transcript evaluated, I guess I don't know how that would be interpreted at many schools, but for us, if they're not having a transcript evaluated and they're not able to provide any of that, I think that would be a very difficult question to say. You have to say you have a bachelor's degree, because we would ask for documentation of that bachelor's degree. Emily, do you have any other thing to add to that?
No, I'm feeling the same way that you are, Mary, without any documentation and not knowing if that is an equivalent. It's,
so I guess what we're saying is we would want to know that although the student has self-disclosed that they have a bachelor's in another country, are they confident and positive that that is an equivalent to a bachelor's degree, and it would be translated as a bachelor's degree here in the United States? And maybe that's just a follow-up question. And if indeed they can, then I think they have to honestly answer that they have a bachelor's degree, and then every institution will handle that however they need to. If indeed the student can't determine or has no way to determine that truly that translates to a bachelor's here in the United States, then I don't see that there would be any issue with them saying that they do not have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, and I would add to that, because Maria's adding a little more context about, they don't want to lie about the first bachelor's degree question, which I mean is fantastic. I think what it really boils down to is trying to do as much due diligence as the student can regarding the degree they've received, as well as maybe just doing, reaching out to some organizations. Like I said, there are third-party accreditors or even local institutions that may have seen transcripts come through from that institution, and just kind of seeing what has come up over previously. So from my experience, I worked with a lot of schools in India and Nepal, and they would get married, kind of to your example. They called it a BBA, which I believe is a bachelor's in business administration, but oftentimes it was a 2-year degree and didn't transfer over as a bachelor's degree. So I think there's just some due diligence to be done there, and I think being honest and forthright, you'll get to the right answer. It's just a matter of doing a little bit of legwork on it.
Yes, I would agree. Yep, absolutely. And again, I also feel that it is important to understand what that student is also submitting to the institutions in which they want to attend. So that's also important to note, and also would play into maybe having the evaluation completed of whatever the student can provide. So, all right. Well, I don't see any other questions popping up in the chat here, and I don't have any other questions from Marlon or from Faith or from Ed. So I will say thank you everyone for attending today. We absolutely appreciate it. Please remember the outreach email address. It's .org. Thank you, Ed, for correcting that. And let us know if you have any other questions. But to end this, I'll just say we really do here in the state of Ohio want to increase our FAFSA completion rate. So it's a combined effort with all of us. So again, thank you for attending, and we look forward to any questions that you may have coming. You can just please send those to us. Thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon.